This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome, everybody. This is episode 3 of the Cornell Turf Show, season 3. Today, our guest is Dr. Kevin Frank of Michigan State. We're going to talk to Kevin about some winter injury things. We talked about this last week, and it continues to be one of the big issues we're seeing on golf courses. So excited to get to that conversation. But first, we'll get to the other Dr. Frank, Frank Rossi. As always, you've got some thoughts for us to start us off this episode.
And Kevin, we taught the Great Lakes School, and everybody kept saying Kevin and Frank, and we didn't know who they were talking to. So thanks for taking the time. Thanks, Carl. Welcome, everyone, to our second golf show. And, of course, it's going to be dominated by what's dominating the conversation in golf. And we're really fortunate to have Kevin here, who's, whether he likes it or not, is stuck with this as an expert now. And I think when you think back about sort of the foundational work done in winter injury, it was done by Dr. Beard in the 60s back at Michigan State. So how about a smile for our dogs? I always grab one. Chase has a dog that decided to pass on the collar. Opie's in for more of managerial role, but still comes in every day. Just love when the dogs have very specific jobs that they're tending to. And, you want to get a golf course superintendent emotional about something, talk to them about their dog. Okay, Carl, it's all yours. Our environmental research project needs another update in the outreach and education session.
Yeah, so we're going to continue with our BMP tips of the day. And on our poster, you'll see one of the tips we actually have in the water section is letting data tell the story. And on this poster, we talk about using evapotranspiration data, ET data, to guide your irrigation decision-making. But there's other types of data we can use. And I saw this really interesting data. This is from Chris Tritterbaugh, the superintendent at Hazeltine National. And this is essentially him taking smoothness measurements every single day on his putting greens. So we call this the bobble test. You rate it 1 to 10. But he's using this data to figure out how long after a disruptive practice do I get back to kind of my ideal level of smoothness. So he likes to be at a 9 or better for his golfers, a very avid and experienced golfing group at Hazeltine National. So that's sort of his standard. You could say the Hazeltine standard is a 9. And as Frank's drawing here, you can see the amount of time there's a heavy sand top dressing there early in May. And you see it takes almost 2 weeks for the greens to get back to a smoothness level that they deem as their threshold, their standard. And so this is an interesting concept, thinking about how many days can I give my golfers the greens that they expect and that they want. And as we get further into the season here, I know people are going to want to get out and maybe do some of these disruptive practices, whether that's top dressing, poking some holes here and there. Just being aware of maybe this idea of how many days can I give my golfers really great playing surfaces. And if you do those disruptive practices in the shoulders of the season, there's certainly times when you should do that, but it's going to take longer to recover. The grass isn't growing at the same rate, right? So these prolonged times of less than ideal conditions, maybe you should take that into account. If it takes 3 weeks to recover from aeration in the fall, but only 2 weeks in the summer, can you start talking to your golfers about how many days they would be getting good greens, and maybe being able to convince them doing this at a time where it recovers faster is going to help them overall over the course of the season. So taking some of this data, I think this is a great idea. You can follow, Chris has a blog series coming out. He's releasing kind of once a week, once every other week, his thoughts on this sort of data. I encourage you to check that out. I'll throw that in the chat, and that'll be the bottom of the YouTube video here, but a good way to think of data and how to use it to your advantage.
Okay, Carl. Well, let me go back and set up the winter issue again, just to remind everybody, moisture is a critical part of this thing in our neck of the woods. You go out to where Kreiser, is in Nebraska. You go out to the places where Kevin's from in North Dakota. They got the other issue that they don't have enough water. They get no snow, and they've got wind issues. Although looks like the old Dakotas had their fair amount of moisture when you consider the fall till early March, right? This is last fall through early March. Now, for the Northeast, right? Again, this is a slide I used last week. just, to remind you, we had some places that were in excess of 150 to 200% of normal throughout the Northeast. At the same time, we heard from Art DiGaetano, our Climate Center director, today, that actually parts of the Northeast are starting to get dry, almost into drought conditions over that December to March period. So it wasn't wet for everybody. And certainly when I look at where the injury was, I don't know that this particular data indicates how wet it was, but there certainly were parts of the Northeast that were significantly wet. And here's that drought condition that Art talked about. This is the update from last week, right? It gets updated on Thursday after I do the show here with Carl. And you can see this area up north continues to be dry. And we're really starting to see the Philadelphia, southern New Jersey areas where they got really sandy soils too. You get down to that part of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, you're pretty sandy down there, which could make the conditions worse. So when it comes to moisture, I will tell you, I visited a golf course this week that said that I visited winter injury damage on, and said the greens where they put these drainage in, these old push-up POA greens, where they put these XGD lines in, did not experience injury. Now, I don't know if, Kevin will tell you, this isn't something you can know every time if this is going to work the way it did. But in this case, this one golf course, they had 6 greens they put the XGDs in, and those were greens that would normally have some damage, and this year did not have it. So obviously there's something to be said for improving drainage. Now, when you look at winter injury patterns, this is some winter injury from the Black course back in 2003, right? And you can see in the middle of the 16th green here, when you've got these big bowl-shaped areas where you get water accumulating and staying longer, this is an easy pattern to see, right? I'm trying to set this up so that you can see, well, there are some patterns here. Now, the other pattern we talked about last year were these freezing and thawing cycles, right? It warms up, there's standing water, the water gets hot, passes it into the soil, right? In this case, it's excluding the moisture, it's getting some air in there. But when you break dormancy, right? When you break dormancy, this is work out of the Prairie Research Center we talked about last week, at 4 annual bluegrass ecotypes, experiencing different warm-ups for different lengths of time. And you see the dramatic drop, right? This plant went from 50% of the plants dying at -24 to 50% of the plants dying at 17 degrees. So it's going to be ecotype related, right? It's going to be how long it was warm related. It's going to be moisture related, right? This is our 18th hole on the Cornell golf course, right? What looks like a clear water path, right? A clear path where water was trying to get off the green. But this is something, Kev, I got a picture off of one of your blog posts in 14. I'm going to bring this up when we get to chatting. But the interesting question is, what is dead, right? What color? I mean, look at this. You got brown. You got yellow, you got sort of yellowy green, right? You got some dark green. There's all different colors here. And then you look close and you're like, wishful thinking. Is it dead? Is it alive? Here's what I can tell you. All of this grass is injured in some way. Now, the extent of its injury is going to determine the conversation for today. What can we expect from recovery, right? So before we go crazy, like trying to recover, the question comes up, my green looks like this. My proxy thing says it's time. Should we be making growth regulator applications to these surfaces that are damaged? Now, if you don't have a damaged surface, Kevin's GDD tracker and our tracker seems to indicate even up into the Finger Lakes, we're in an ideal time for the spring application. Again, hopefully you made a fall application. Of course, it's an interesting question. If you made a fall application, how does it help recovery or hinder recovery? But this is a topic of discussion. The timing is saying it's good. If you know you're not injured, obviously this would be an ideal time to make, I'm going the wrong way, to make that application. Now, the solution to this is not have POA, but unfortunately, that's not really an option for most people. So when you go to surfaces, and in this particular case, you see the damaged annual bluegrass, and you can see the bentgrass really just thriving here with no problem at all. And again, we talked about it last week. This is one of those Achilles heels of annual bluegrass, is keeping it alive through the winter. So here we are, we're getting in the season, and it still looks like this, right? So Kevin, one of the things that I want to talk about is, how do we get it moving faster? Well, clearly covers is one way to go here. And of course, we know what covers are doing. They're driving up the temperature there. So what are we expecting? What did we get, and what are we expecting temperature-wise? We've been warmer than normal. The last week was as much as 10 and 12 degrees above normal in some places, around normal, closer to the coast, right? Impacted by the ocean, cooling it off a little bit. But inland, we were as much as 12 to 14 degrees above normal, which was good. But it's not good looking forward. The degree day accumulation moving forward is in the single digits, which is not a good forecast for accumulating heat. I pulled this particular look at sky cover. You can go to the National Forecast Center and look at how much sun you're going to get, right? And then you realize why on earth Kevin and Carl and I live in the most miserable places in the world where the sun doesn't shine. Kevin is one of those few people that lives in a university at a cloudy place like we do. But obviously, this is going to be a significant component. Even if the air is warm, to really accelerate these conditions, you got to have sun. So not only are we not going to have sun, it doesn't appear, it looks like we're going to get a ton of rainfall, particularly along the coastline. You're looking at 1 to 2 inches over the next several days of precip, around half an inch to an inch just about everywhere else. You look at these forecasts, the next 2 days are going to be wet. The weekend's going to be about an inch, inch and a half of total precip. A good thing we're not sitting out in the middle of the Atlantic. We could be getting as much as 3 or 4 inches if that storm moved inland a little bit. So, this is not necessarily what we need for ideal recovery. And soil temperatures, honestly, have not budged, Carl, since last week when we talked about this. We're still in the mid 50s at its peak. And it's getting into the 50s up the Hudson Valley. But you come up here, where we've got a lot of damage. We've still got soils in the upper 30s and 40s. Now, of course, weed control is one of those things you use temperature for. And, those maps Kevin keeps them on the degree day tracker. I'd encourage you to go look at them. But if we're talking about heat, Kevin, now I'm setting you up, buddy. This is what I'm seeing guys doing. It's like, how much is dead? Let me try these covers. They put a couple in some spot areas, right? And let me get this. Some people are going for black sand, right? This is an easier way to go, maybe not as labor intensive. You look closer, you can really see the sort of increase that you get. And so here he is. We don't have to show him in this great blog post that he did in 14. And Kevin, here's the picture you used, kid. This is what it looked like in April of 2014. What's going to come back? And it looks like your predictions were okay. What was dead, and what you thought would come back. So listen, I'm going to stop sharing and just, first I'd ask you just simply to comment on, what you heard me yak about, and then take us on a little journey for what superintendents experiencing this damage are going to have to deal with trying to get these things recovered.
Thanks, Frank. Just to clarify, did you call me kid just a little while ago? Because if so, I appreciate that. I don't get that very much anymore.
I did. So I'll call you kid. I'll call you brother. I do all sorts of 70s lingo.
So I guess that's refreshing. It's interesting what's going on. We haven't had, as far as I know, we've had a little bit of spotty damage around this area, but we haven't had any real significant winter kill that I'm aware of. But those temps you're talking about. You're talking about the precipitation totals and stuff coming. We're talking in the solid form, although they're saying it's not going to stick around in the next couple of days, but they're talking snowfall. So that gives you an idea of the challenge that winter kill reestablishment presents, is just those soil temps. You know, if you're in the 30s in areas or just creeping up into 40s, I still think when you know, first of all, what's dead? I have no, you know, maybe I'm a good guesser, but from what I've seen over the years, if it's like those white colors where it's completely bleached, I think it's gone. Those are the ones that those are the areas that I look at and go, you got to have a plan. Anything that's, you know, brownish, toastier, at least in this area, like where we deal with, I don't think it's generally dead. Now, you get to the plain states where I guess they've had a bunch of desiccation injury this year that sounds pretty disastrous. Everything out there is just brown is dead. But we deal more with these moisture issues. You know, you can try to assess it, you know, as many soups have done, you know, bring a core in, heat it up in your shop, and you get a quick assessment, probably faster than you're going to get out in the field. I still think when it comes to reestablishment, it's a get things going sooner rather than later. One of the big challenges, of course, can just be soil moisture, of like, how are you gonna prep that dead seed bed, so to speak, and whether you're going to be able to get in there. If it's soaking wet, you don't want to do damage by whether you're using a job saver attachment, whether you're slit seeding, whether you're verticutting and dragging seed in, whatever it is.
Okay, well, that brings to the first question, right? Because you know, like I know, every turf manager's first move is to poke a hole. It's the first move every time, poke a hole. What do you recommend relative to poking a hole as far as warming that whole system up, right? If heat is what's going to drive this thing, is disturbance key to that, or is it secondary to that?
I think it depends. I mean, if that's all you've got going for you of trying to warm it up, I think I'd go ahead and open it up. If you have covers, if you have, you know, you want to go out there and put black sand on it, if you want to use just a pigment that you spray that makes it green and camouflages it and helps warm it up, maybe I'd go ahead and do that before I start prepping the seed bed. But I still think that also depends, you know, if you think it's dead, I still think I'd go rather than wait. I've seen guys, you know, argue over this, that, you know, whether it's pie in the sky or whatever, that no, I don't think it's dead, I'm going to wait. And I was like, well, every day you wait, you know, you look at the forecast and everybody thinks they know what's going on. And then all of a sudden you have, like here in East Lansing area, we had 60 degrees on Monday. And that really wasn't, it was supposed to be a decent day, but it wasn't supposed to be that nice. Now the rest of the week is awful, but it's like you kind of take it when it comes. And if you're not, if you don't get prepped and get things in the ground, I mean, you know, you're just delaying the inevitable, I think, in many cases.
So in your mind, when you see that stuff you're sure is dead, how do you then decide, should I try to prep it for seed or cut it and sod it, plug it? How do you, what has been your experience in making that decision?
I think a lot of people start with seed, realize how long it takes, give up and sod it. So, and it obviously depends on the size of the area. Like that picture you showed from Bethpage, you know, that long, slender area. Something like that, you know, if you've got sod, if you got plugs, I'd probably get it over with and just be done with it. And, you know, people say, well, it doesn't match perfectly, or, you know, it takes a little while, but it's just, I mean, you know, sometimes the best case scenario is as we battle through these spring periods, you might be 8 weeks before you have anything that you feel like you can play on, you know, and that's why if it's minor damage and you've got a big nursery green and it's a bird bath type damage or something, I think in many cases, just get it done with.
So what about the covering driving up the heat? How much have you played around with, is a pigment better than black sand? if I put black sand in a pigment, does that save me to cover? Here's the thing that's on my mind. Whenever we talk covers, you're always going to play the game. It's on, and then, you get that 60-degree day and it gets, it gets heating up and you start to freak out. So you pull it off, and then you got those, stakes every 2 feet, and then they're getting thrown somewhere where a mower can hit them. So how do you reconcile? How do you decide how to make recommendations to folks on warming up the system?
I think with covers, how many guys do you have on staff that can help you yank covers all the time? I think that's a big factor. I honestly, it's been, quite a few years since we tried to do the cover reestablishment studies. The thing that we found is you might get some benefit till it's out of the ground, but after that, I think it diminishes pretty quick. Probably your biggest benefit is cold nights. So it's like, I'm looking at our forecast. We're in the 30s, or we're in the not single digits. We're close to it this weekend. Ooh. And then even next week, it's like 30s every night with highs maybe around 50. So that's an awful scenario, but assuming you're a little bit warmer than that, if you see those nights where it's colder, I think sometimes just that benefit of having that cover in place overnight can maybe help it keep going a little bit. One of the problems with the covers, as you had alluded to, Frank, was just the constant pull and push, right? So it's like, okay, so, I get out there, I establish it, it's growing. Okay, I want to mow, or I want to spray some fertilizer or whatever. You got to pull this thing off, spray, put it back on. I think you kind of get to a point where it's just like it's you're chasing your tail. So I think there's probably some benefit initially, especially when it's cold. But after that, I'd probably just pull them and just forget it.
Yeah, because once they get covered and they get warm, if we get those single digits, you probably have, like I have, seen them get set back even further than if you didn't do anything.
Yeah. So and I think the pigment versus black sand, we played around with that. We didn't see as much heating effect as we thought we would with the pigment, but I think it was probably our own fault, as we didn't continually spray the pigment, and it tended to fade on us. So I think if you're going to use like a green pigment, you need to have that sprayed regularly. And some guys have even complained, or not complained, they've said, I started using that, and then I realized, I can't tell what's dead anymore. Because it just camouflaged everything. And it's like, it's great for maybe the golfer or something, but for the superintendent, they're going, geez, what are the areas I need to touch up? I think the black sands worked great. I had a superintendent in Northern Michigan one year. When I walked onto his golf course, I literally gasped. He had used Milorganite to a level that I don't think I'd ever seen before. But it helped him. Now it's helped him heat up, especially as you get Northern Michigan, like, Frank, I mean, you're sitting next to Lake Michigan and stuff, and it's never warming up until June sometimes. But you also have that issue of dealing with that nutrient load, and then, at some point trying to, blow that fertilizer off to the edges or whatever and pick it up. But, you kind of see it all at some point, anything to try to help facilitate warming up that surface when it's when weather isn't helping us out.
Yeah, because I remember years ago, there was a senior men's open at Weston Country Club in Salem, Massachusetts, and they had a massive winter kill, and they went out and sprayed like 30 ounces of ferrous sulfate and just turned the place black to try to draw heat to it. I want you to give me an assessment, right? You're looking at the next couple of weeks. You know what you know. I want to put into people's heads here and get on the record. It's not, we could be a month to 6 weeks from having a playable surface on these sorts of damaged greens. Is that a reasonable assessment? If a whole green is damaged, that you're looking at 4 to 6 weeks to get it into play?
I think that's a very optimistic assessment. I mean, I'm just going back to what we saw, the epic event of 13-14 and 14-15, kind of 14-15 in the northern part of the country. You look back at that weather, it's probably not a whole lot different than it is right now as far as being cold. And we had, some cases 18 greens wiped out. If if they were back on them the first week of June, it was pretty good. And certainly at that point, they weren't up to, insert your country club facility's name, their standards, but at least they were playing them. So that was looking at closer, what were you saying, 4 to 6 weeks? That was looking at maybe like 6 to 8 to 10.
So what about inputs? We went through the coring business. We'll maybe revisit that, but what about inputs? Should you be goosing them with nitrogen? Should you be, starter fertilizer? What do you recommend that is going to help?
I think any and all, right?
Okay.
I mean, you're pushing growth. So I still advocate, just like you're reestablishing, put down a starter when you seed. And then I've seen it both ways of people using more, complete fertilizers as they go forward, or guys just going, hey, I'm just gonna, as soon as it's up and growing, I'm gonna spray it, 1/10 of a pound of N every week. Throw some other stuff in there if you want, but I think it's primarily nitrogen that's going to help you grow. And you have to switch the mindset from, and this is a struggle, right? You've got areas of that green that are probably just fine and areas that are dead. It's hard to, you got a target spray, maybe a little spray hawk or something like that. But you also have to shift that mindset that I'm now trying to grow grass instead of manage on the edge where I want firm, fast putting greens. And also don't forget about water, because you're probably going to have to, if it's spotty areas, you're going to have to hand water those areas. You can't let it dry out, right? I mean, that's just number one. But one of those days you referred to where it's 65 or whatever, and you guys kind of forget about that spot, seed might be up, but it can go in a hurry. So, but yeah, I think it's something you will have to you probably don't catch up the rest of the year in some of these areas. I mean, it's not going to be the same because you've reestablished and you pushed it probably more than you wanted to, but you had to get grass. I mean, that's the number one thing. You got to get grass.
Yeah. And the worst part is, as you said, the areas that aren't damaged, if you start doing that recovery stuff to them, now you're going to have organic matter accumulation problems if you start pushing growth there. Carl, questions? Did I see one come up?
Yeah, we do have a question from our guy Josh out in Saratoga. Solid or permeable covers, and if we're talking about the winter injury we're seeing this year, which seems like less of the permanent ice cover and more of this fluctuations in temperature. What are your opinions on those? Kevin?
I think it's whatever cover you have, but if I have a choice, I would probably take the permeable.
Permeable, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Kevin, we got 1 minute, buddy, but you brought up a really good point. It's probably good for superintendents who are experiencing this to pace themselves, right? Because my experience is you exert a lot of energy to get these things back, and it's May 1st or June 1st, and it feels like September 1st. So I think what you're saying is it may actually take most of the year to get it back, which if you've got large areas and you got a nursery, that may be the tipping point right there, that I can probably get this turfed area back in shape in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, versus waiting for seed to fill in and seeding bent grass into bent poa greens. Bent grass seed's not going to jump out of the ground. Do you even recommend throwing bent grass seed, or should we just stir it up and let the poa seed do its thing?
I think the studies we've done, although you doubt yourself, bent will get in there and we'll make a foothold by the end of the season. I think the thing too, Frank, which is very difficult for the superintendent, they stare at it every frickin' day.
Every day.
And it's like, when you look at it every day, and I know you're going to, it is so hard to feel like you're making progress. It's like I would come out to a site 1 week and I may go back a week later or 2 weeks later and I go, wow, you've made tremendous progress. And they look at it and go, really? I hadn't noticed. Because I look at it every freaking day and it's driving me crazy, If you have the sporadic damage, that's tough because you got to seed into it. If you got isolated where you can core it, you can sod it and get it over with, I'd probably just do it if you've got the ability to do it, because you're going to be chasing your tail no matter what. It's just, I often think the isolated damage is easier to deal with than when it's sporadic pot marks of poa that died all across the green.
Kevin? It's so great to see you. Thanks for taking the time. I'm glad the windows worked out.
We're all good. It's not even raining today,
Right.
so it's a great day to replace windows in a house.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Carl, get us out of here.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This has been episode 3 of our Cornell Turf Show this year. Also, I guess doubles as a half an hour long ad for bentgrass. If you want to look at it that way, is one long ad for bentgrass. But thanks again for joining today. Tomorrow we'll have Evan Meskidy from Penn State. We're going to be talking about infields and working the dirt early in the year. So if you're interested in that, tune in tomorrow. Thanks all for joining. We'll see you next time.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.